I'm Alex Batdorf, and you're watching Get Shit Done, the place where we're taking female entrepreneurs from inspiration to activation. When I started Get Shit Done, my vision was to shift the entrepreneurial ecosystem so that female founders would have more skin in the game. And a part of that dream is to invest in female founders. And over the last few years, I've had the pleasure of meeting so many amazing female founders who share the same vision as me. That's why I brought on my guest today, who is a seasoned serial entrepreneur who raised $13 million in her last company, started another company, is about to raise money for that company, and get this, she's also investing specifically in female founders at the fund she's at, XFactor Ventures. So if you are looking to learn from an entrepreneur/investor on how to raise capital from investors, stay tuned. Anna Palmer is co-founder at Dough, a platform driving purchase power and awareness around women-owned businesses to create economic equality. As if her schedule wasn't already busy, she not only runs her own company, she's also making investments in other female-founded startups as an investment partner at XFactor Ventures, a pre-seed and seed investment fund for female founders where she makes investments alongside other successful female founders/investors. Anna was formerly the co-founder and CEO of Fashion Project, the industry leader in online designer clothing donation, where she raised $13 million. You may have caught Anna featured in Forbes, the Financial Times, InStyle magazine, I could go on, either discussing retail innovation, entrepreneurship, or equality in funding for female founders. Anna, welcome to Get Shit Done.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So excited here. So we met in Miami.
Yes.
We're at a conference a few years ago. And it's so funny because I met Emma from Wild Fang, who's also been interviewed on the show, at that same conference. That was a pretty good conference, at least of women that I got to meet.
It was a great conference.
Yeah, it was awesome. But really what I wanted to focus on in today's episode, because you have a very unique position. And before this, we were chatting a little bit about how we hear so many stories about how drab it is for female founders, and one of the solutions is having more female investors at the table. But not even just investors. We have someone who has been a founder and now is an investor, but still a founder at the same time.
Yeah.
You're a founder and investor, so that's even better. So let's backtrack a little and talk about what XFactor Ventures is and then why you started it.
Sure. So XFactor Ventures is an early stage seed fund backing billion-dollar opportunities by at least one female founder. And our fund will do anything from two people with an idea and a slide deck all the way through to about a $2 million institutional seed round. We don't have a specific sector focus, so we funded everything from like beauty companies and fashion companies all the way through to food tech, healthcare tech, some really interesting things. One thing that makes us unique is we're all founders ourselves. So all of the partners are running companies. They've scaled their companies to what we call Series A and beyond. And so we're all in a position to give advice on day-to-day founder stuff alongside of having the investor hat.
Ooh, and that is so necessary, because the amount of times I've been in rooms with investors who are so oblivious to like the human side of being an entrepreneur is sad. And you see the difference between the ones who have been entrepreneurs who are like, yeah, you need to take care of yourself. So that's awesome. So then you have your new venture that you're working on. If you want to touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah. So I previously founded a company, sold that, and now I'm going back to do it all over again. So it might be a little bit crazy, but I love it. So I'm back raising my seed round the same time that I'm funding other people's seed rounds, which is an interesting place to be. My company, Dough, we are a membership community offering perks and discounts and exclusive access to shoppers who want to shop women-owned. So if you think a little bit like what AARP did for senior citizens, of uniting all them together and giving them discounts and travel and airfare, et cetera, we're doing that to unite the wallet power of women to direct more capital to women businesses and put a little bit more money back in your pocket as a shopper.
Awesome. So then how did you go from being founder to investor, but also founder? Like, what made you decide that I want to start investing, especially in women?
Yeah, so that came from my own personal experience. So I'd raised a little over $13 million for my first company, and it was primarily a female-focused company. So we were the industry leader in high-end clothing donation, which usually in the family, the woman is the one that has the bigger closet and also is the one that controls charitable giving. Through that experience, I was pretty frustrated that the people sitting on the other side of the table didn't intuitively understand my product. And so I would end up talking to assistants or wives on conference calls, like whatever woman happened to be walking by, she would become the focus group. And I was really lucky that I was able to raise, and I had some great partners in that. But it really made me think, what are all the products that aren't getting funded just because of who's in the room? And so after I left Fashion Projects, my first company, and we had the sale, I ended up reuniting with a couple of people here in Boston, Flybridge Capital, and deciding we could actually do something about this. And so created the fund of XFactor to really emphasize putting checkbooks in the hands of more women, and then ultimately hoping that that means more women get funded across the board.
Awesome. So then what's that process like? So how do you even get started in investing and building this fund? What did that process look like?
Yeah, so the first step in that process was finding somebody that had done it before. So I was really lucky that Chip Hazard from Flybridge Capital was interested also in this idea, and he had been investing for a long time, and so he knew what it took to build a fund because he had built his own. And so I would say first step in that is finding a partner that really understands what that takes. And then second step in that process was figuring out what the mechanics were, how it was going to operate, and what we thought we were doing that was really differentiated in the market. So the same thing as if you were an entrepreneur starting a company, venture funds in the early stages, it's kind of the same thing. You're creating something from scratch. And then the third piece of that is all of the LP limited partner connections that you need to then raise to put money into the fund.
Got it. So then with your guys' fund, you said that you need at least one female founder for you guys to even make an investment. What are the qualities you guys are looking for in founders themselves? Because one of the best pieces of advice I got early on with my first venture that failed in college was that investors invest in people and not ideas. And I find when I do get pitched by some entrepreneurs, whether they're male or female, they want to lead so much with the big idea, where I'm just like, well, what about you? Because ideas are a dime a dozen. Someone's probably had your idea before, but what makes it different is you. So what qualities are you guys looking for in founders?
Yeah, so my thought on this has evolved over time, and where I've landed is I really look for grit, hustle, and then also thinking about, is this company the right company for this founder to start? So I'm looking for a founder that is so obsessed with this idea or so obsessed with the mission that their entire life is operating around that. And especially in the early days, I think things are going to get hard and really, really hard, as you know, as another founder.
I don't even think the word, like there has to be another word. I don't know if it exists for hard.
Yeah,
because it's not just hard; it's like beyond that.
Beyond hard, yeah. Like most stressful days of your life, hardest challenges you've ever come across, and so I think the founders that end up making it through that are the founders that have this like hustle and drive and passion for the idea, and you know that they're going to make it happen whether you're on board or not. It's not your investment dollars that are making a difference. Like even if they have to charge through brick walls and do it with $0, they're going to figure it out.
Love that. So I love when founders become investors because again, it goes back to having a little more empathy. And you kind of have an insider's track because you've done it and now you're doing the investing. So what are some things like walking through the process of outreach to investors and pitching and such? So what are some things that you want to see founders doing when they're doing outreach to you? Because that's the initial phase of getting connected with the investor. Like, what are some do's and don'ts that you would like to give to people?
So number one, I would say, is be persistent. Mm-hmm. Not obnoxious, but persistent.
There's a line.
There's a fine line. And what I mean by that is, I think, like, we see so much volume of things, and I personally, I know, trying to juggle my day job plus the investing side, it's really nice when a founder like keeps pinging me and is like, hey, no, I really want to talk to you, and here's why, and that includes exactly why they think that we're a good fit. So not just like, hey, I'm looking for money, but hey, specifically you as a human, I think you can add a lot to what I'm doing, and we should work together.
Oh, you don't want to be mass BCC?
Or like the yeah, exactly. So I'd say that, and then also finding people who know me already to make the intros. I mean, you hear that all of the time, and I would even take it one step farther. So it's not just one warm intro, but if you have multiple people that happen to know the person that you want to work with, to get all of them to drop a note and say, hey, this is really interesting, you should take a look at it.
What advice would you give to founders? Because as I'm sure you are very well aware of this, for founders in general, like minority groups in general, it's hard getting access because you might not have access to a group of people who would know someone like you or an investor in general. So then what would you say is a workaround with that if you might not have access to those networks?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was actually having a conversation at a conference I went to last week about this specific thing. Mm-hmm. I think there's two solutions to that. So the first is if you can find some sort of accelerator program, or a lot of times there's early stage things for founders like Capital Network here in Boston is an example of that, to find something that really focuses on the really early side of the company and get networked in there. The second thing I think would be just finding some sort of sponsor. So for me, with my first company, when I went to try to raise money, I didn't know what I was doing. I was coming out of law school. I didn't have the network. And so I went to something called the Unconference, which was a conference that was like choose your own adventure almost, of where you want to go and who you want to talk to. And in that, they had a section that was one-on-one meetings, but you had to get there really early and like match with the person. And I don't know, there's a lot of crazy things around it to make sure that you met with the person that you wanted to meet with. But in that, I knew there was one person that would have been really interested in my business based on all the research that I did of other people that were going to be there. Mm-hmm. And so I got there super early, basically like harassed the conference organizer to make sure that I got paired with this person, mm-hmm. and then used that person once they got excited about what I was doing to be my network connector in. And so I think getting creative about how you find that person, and then using that person to create the network for you. So they introduced me to 5 or 6 people, and then those 5 or 6 people introduced me out, and all of a sudden, over a period of a couple months, I had a decent Rolodex, but it took that one first.
I have my mentor who actually invested in my last company is that for me. He's definitely my sponsor.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Like by accident, but he's that for me. And I like this, like connecting the dots in the research, because I don't know if you ever heard of Rachel Rennock. She's from Wethos. They're kind of like the fire.
Yeah. She's great.
Love her. But she was talking about the way she did outreach, because she had no access to this network of investors. She's like, I didn't know anyone in finance. I don't know anything like that. But the research, like you mentioned, is do research on who are at these funds, what are they interested in, even digging down to their Twitter feeds. Like, what are things specifically that I can say, hey, I think you'll like my company because X, Y, and Z. So I love that, especially finding the sponsor. So then let's say you get connected to the investor now. Now you're going to the pitch side of things. And we kind of touched base a little bit on this before we started recording, is that I've even seen when I was helping with due diligence at a family fund, I saw some differences in the way that men and women pitched me, where I found men were pitching on their vision while a lot of women were pitching me on why they were good enough. And it stuck me in the heart, because I'm like, I understand where she's coming from because I've done that. So what would you say are some do's and don'ts on the pitching side when someone's coming to pitch you?
So the first thing that I would say is when you get in the room, rather than starting by talking about you, immediately turn the conversation and ask the investor questions. So not a ton, but something like, what gets you really excited in an investment? Of everything that you've done, what are you most proud of investing wise? Or how do you work with a founder? And then listen to their answers. And as they're talking, you're going to be able to discern what parts of your business they're going to be most interested in. And so as an example, if I'm pitching dough to an investor and I ask what gets you excited, and the investor says, I really like companies that not only are making money, but also I feel like they're changing the world, they're improving something in some sort of way. Yeah. Then when I pitch the company, I'm going to emphasize that a little bit more versus if I talked to an investor and they said, I get really excited about creating big returns for my LPs, then I'd be like, great, let's talk all about how this is $1 billion opportunity and, AAA is a 57 million member business and comparable and all these things. And so I changed my pitch based on what the investor says they're interested in. And I'm surprised, I think, how many founders, when they walk in a room, never ask questions of the person that's on the other side of the table. That would be like coming in to try to sell a product to your customer and never doing customer discovery, which is kind of crazy to me. So that would be advice one. I think advice two is exactly what you touched on. So know that the investor in the back of their mind is going to be discounting all of your projections, especially in the financials. And so
it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit.
Right. Like, you don't know, right? And so to know that your pitch should be good enough to get them excited and to think about it from that perspective and not like, if everything goes wrong, what do I still think I can hit? So really like try to create the best case scenario and present that, I think, in the first couple meetings.
Love that. So what is something you did in your last company that you now cringe at as an investor?
One thing I didn't do well is I didn't really dig in on what the investor was looking for as far as like use of capital to the company, how they actually wanted to interact with me as CEO. Is there a personality fit there? All of the things that over time as you're working together start to become major things as the company gets bigger and bigger. And so it led to some conflicts where it would be like if an investor thinks that you should be profitable over growth, if we're investing a ton in marketing and we're losing money on that, then they're going to be like, whoa, that's not what I signed up for. Or vice versa, if you have an investor that's like grow at all costs and you're not spending into marketing, they're going to be like, what are you doing? And I had investors on both sides of that.
Ooh,
and
same. Same. And it's confusing.
It makes it really, really hard because you're kind of stuck in the middle because either way, you're going to have part of your board that isn't excited about the trajectory that you're really laying as a CEO. So I think this time around, that's one thing I will definitely change as I'm raising for my company. And as an investor, I make sure to have those conversations with people, even if they don't ask, to make sure that it's a fit.
Got it. So speaking of fit, with finding investors and establishing those relationships and even signing on the dotted line. So now I always tell people, I'm just like finding investors is literally like marrying somebody. And a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we get so excited about growing our companies that we're just like, we just need that money in, and sometimes neglect to realize, is this somebody or a fund that I want to be with long term? And then you kind of get in bed with someone and you're like, I'm kind of screwed. So what are some suggestions or tips you have for female founders in terms of identifying those best matches for investors?
Good question. I think the place I would start is knowing yourself and knowing your company. So if you know who you are and you know what type of person you work best with. So I know for me, I'm definitely a great in-person conversationalist, and I like talking about business ideas, and I'll walk you through what's happening with the company in person. I'm not super great over email, as an example. And so if I had an investor that wanted email updates all of the time or communicated that way primarily, I think it would be a little bit hard, and we have to set expectations there. Yeah. So knowing your strengths and weaknesses as a person, and then also like what we were talking about, knowing what it is with your company, that the vision, how is it going to grow? How are you going to capitalize it? All the things that we talked about, profitability versus growth. If you know your trajectory, then you know what questions to ask. And then I'd say on a more tactical level, just make sure you spend a little bit of time with the person. I know sometimes with funding, it's like a whirlwind. You're like, okay, great, you want to invest in me, I need money in the right way, let's do this. But really, even if it's just taking one meeting and saying, hey, can we spend half an hour just talking about who we are as people and getting to know each other, taking a little bit of a step back there, I think gives you a bit of perspective. And then lastly, I'd say trust your gut. I think you know if it's a fit or not, and if you feel like it's not, then listen to that because it's probably right.
I think that last point is the one we tend to neglect the most because we're like, we just need money right now.
It's really easy to sit on the side of the table and be like, oh, you should ask me if I'm a good fit. Yeah. But as an entrepreneur, I know that's really hard. But I think just thinking about it in the long run, the easy decision right away could ultimately end up destroying your company long term. And so it's really important to get it right.
Yeah. What are some like major red flags you've experienced when you were raising, well, you're still raising, but your last company and even now, when you're like, you should definitely walk away from this investor relationship?
So I think one is pay very close attention to how they treat you in the raise process. Because at that point in time, they should be trying to court you, right? So if there's anything that comes up of either them being overly aggressive, or if you feel like for some reason you're being bullied into terms that maybe you don't want to take, just remember that relationship probably gets even harder over time and not necessarily easier, because right now it's like the same way if you're dating a person that they're trying to put their best foot forward. So I'd say pay attention to that. Oh, and then actually one other thing. So if it's a brand new fund and there's no track record for you to go from, make sure that you at least talk to people if you know that person, or somehow find a way to still do diligence on the fund itself. Because if I look back on the investors that we had that were a little bit tough, it were people that necessarily didn't have the track record for us to vet.
Yeah, we made that mistake early on where we had a lead who ended up only putting in 7% of what they promised because it was a new fund, and we didn't do enough due diligence on that. So it was a good learning lesson, but it sucked.
We had one of those too. So
yeah, we go through it, but not everyone else needs to go through it. We've done it, so
yeah, don't do that.
Don't do it.
Just take away from this. Yeah, this interview.
What are those final pieces that you're looking for from a founder in their company that make you say, okay, this is the investment I want to make?
Yeah. I think final pieces I'm looking for primarily are just all about the founder, and can they deliver on what it is that they're telling me that they're going to do. And so the best examples of that are founders that come in and we have that first conversation, and then they say, this is what we're doing and love to have you as part of it. I'm like, okay, let me go back and think about it. And then they follow up almost right away, and they're like, hey, just following up from the meeting, you said that you would do these 3 things. Awesome. Here's the information to make that easy for you. So I'm actually going through this with a founder right now where there were 3 intros that I promised to make, and she immediately emailed back and gave me the quick little blurb to forward, and then stayed on me to make sure I did it. And she kind of like ramped me up through the process, so I got progressively more excited. So she'd email me every so often and say, hey, just so you know, we just had this metric that happened today, or I told you we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we just exceeded that by this much. And so I got to see over time, and even the time was like, 2 or 3 weeks, but I get to see over time how she's delivering on what she told me, and then that gets me excited. I'm like, oh, okay, like she's executing on it. I should dig into this even harder. And so I think about that as like, don't just have the meeting. I think of the meeting as the end game, or if the investor says, okay, great, I need to go back and research this or do X, Y, Z. Don't just wait for them to come back to you and say something. Like, you can actively control that process and guide that investor through. And I think founders that do that are usually more successful in the fundraising process.
Y'all, I have always loved investors who have been entrepreneurs before because they understand the struggle, and the struggle is real. But I want to hear from y'all. Are there any questions you have about raising money from investors that we didn't cover in this episode? Make sure to post your questions below. And if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to continue to learn from other badass babes who have grown phenomenal companies, make sure to subscribe to this channel. But in the meantime, queens, keep getting shit done.